Hello everyone. So this video is on the next chapter on global management. So global management, sometimes also called international management, and it looks really at the rise of global villages and all the trends that are happening around the world that are contributing towards increasing globalization. Globalization pretty much refers to the trend of the world economy towards becoming a more interdependent system instead of the US having its own economy and China having its own economy. These economies are becoming more and more interdependent. And this trend is reflected in the rise of global villages, more and more e-commerce. There are a lot more mini firms that are becoming internet enabled because more and more smaller firms are able to do business because of the rising globalization. But globalization has its positive and negative effects as well. So now, in this particular video, I'm not going to go over every single bit of the chapter. I know your book does a very good job of explaining it, but there are certain portions of the chapter that I really want to highlight. And one of them is about the positive effects of globalization or global economy. Some of the positive effects are that, as I said earlier, smaller firms or mini firms that are operating worldwide are able to come up. If you tomorrow want to have a business sitting in the US or in China or in India or any other part of the country or the world, and you want to do business internationally, globalization and the rise of internet economy is helping you do that. Consumers around the world can buy things sitting anywhere in the world. So you could be sitting in the US and you could buy products from the UK. It's creating more job mobility. But then, what are the negative effects of this economy? Well, one of the biggest negative effects that we saw was in recent years the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009 Great Recession, financial crisis that helped spark a housing and credit crisis and a housing and credit bubble. And it did not just affect the US, it affected so many of the other economies, international economies across the globe. It shows you how the economies are interrelated. Another negative effect or the side effect of globalization is that a lot of well-paying jobs move from one country to another, from one shore to another, and this does affect the local labor population. But whether it's negative or not, globalization is a reality. And that's the biggest reason that it is a part of your chapter or your course. Why study international management? Because it will affect you. It does affect you directly or indirectly. You could be working overseas, and foreign experiences we've seen demonstrate independence, resourcefulness, entrepreneurship. So if you are someone who is on the fence on what your major should be, think about international management if that's something that excites you. Find out more information because international management involves a lot of traveling, a lot of learning about cultures, and also about adapting to those cultures. And we will talk in a minute. I will talk about looking at and assessing whether you are good at adapting to other cultures before you start thinking about international management as a major. Do you even have the characteristics and the capability that you need to be able to be successful internationally? But even if you're not traveling abroad, you could use international management because so many companies in your domestic local area are becoming more and more international. You will be dealing with international customers. You might be dealing with international suppliers or buyers. And so at some level or another, you will be dealing with international management. You may deal with a foreign worker or an employee in your own organization. In either case, it's really important to understand what international management is and how it works. So before we go forward, this is what I want you to do. Feel free to pause this video at this point and take out your smartphone, scan this QR code, and it will lead you to a website that has a test that helps you see your score on an ethnocentrism scale. And so go ahead, pause the video. If you don't have a smartphone and you prefer to do things on your laptop, at the bottom of this video in the comments box, there is the web link for the website that this QR code leads to. So if you're not able to use the QR code, just follow the web link that's at the bottom of the video and take the test. Take the test, take the scale, look at your score, and then come back to the video. So go ahead and pause it. Okay. So I'm assuming now you have taken the ethnocentrism scale and you have coded and scored your responses. How did you score? Did you score really high on the ethnocentrism scale, or did you score really low? Because if you scored really high on an ethnocentrism scale, what does it mean? Ethnocentric people or ethnocentric managers believe that their native country or their own culture, language, and behavior are all superior to others. Right? Normally, ethnocentric managers deeply believe that they know the best. They know the best way to do things. It can be problematic in an international setting because if you believe you are the best, you are unable to learn from your colleagues who may be from another country, and you are going to be unable to manage them as well. So if you are scoring really high on ethnocentrism scale, one of two things can happen. First, you might decide that international management is not something that you want to engage in, and that's fine. You learn international management in this class, and then take another major up. Or the second thing could be that you decide that you really are passionate about international management, you really want to gain the skills, but you're scoring high in ethnocentrism. Well, then you work towards reducing ethnocentrism. What we have seen, ethnocentrism actually reduces the more exposure you have to international practices and culture. So the more you travel, and the more you interact with people of different backgrounds and different countries, the more languages you learn, try out new experiences, the higher the chances your score in ethnocentrism is going to decrease. So once you know about that, you know about ethnocentrism, let's talk about how do companies really expand internationally. There are multiple ways of expanding internationally. First, why do companies really need to go abroad? Why do they need to expand? Some of the biggest reasons are, availability of supplies. You might find new markets in another country. If you've saturated your own market, let's say a cell phone company sells in their own local country, and the market is saturating. Everyone has a cell phone now. What do? Well, you can go and look at another country that doesn't have your cell phone, that hasn't used it. That's a new market that you are accessing. Sometimes labor costs are lower in different countries, so companies like to expand internationally. You might have access to financial resources in another country. And another big reason a lot of companies expand internationally is to avoid import quotas and tariffs. No matter what your reason for expanding internationally, there are a few ways that you can. And these ways range from, if you look at it on the left-hand side, from the lowest risk to the highest risk, right? So on this left side of the spectrum are things such as outsourcing, global outsourcing. There's outsourcing at home. Outsourcing plain and simple means using suppliers outside your company to provide goods and services. And if you're doing it at a global level, it would be global outsourcing. Global outsourcing is the least amount of risk because you're not going somewhere, you're not setting up the business, you are hiring a third party to do it for you. You're not taking as much risk. And you're hiring the third party from that home country where you want to do business from. And so they know the culture there, so you don't have to necessarily worry too much. I would still say it's a good thing and a good business practice to learn and understand the culture of this other country that you're outsourcing from because it will improve your business practices. But your amount of risk in terms of money you're investing and time you're investing is a lot less compared to if you go to the very other extreme on this side a wholly owned subsidiary, which might also be called offshoring, where you're relocating your operations or you are um, building, totally owning and controlling your own organization in another country. That's the highest risk. Not only are you putting money and manpower, you also need to be very, very familiar with the local culture, very, very good at understanding where it matches your own culture, where it doesn't. And you have to have a much more geocentric perspective, where you're able to understand what are the best practices from both cultures, what works, what doesn't work, and how do you apply it. So, when we're talking about expanding internationally, we do have to talk about the world of free trade. Um, the big bodies in the organizations that are promoting international trade and big trade are the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization, as you must have gleaned from the book, it's made up of 159 members, and it's designed to monitor and enforce trade agreements. So all WTO does is oversee and enforce trade agreements. So agreements are based on GATT, which is GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And it's an international accord which was first signed in 1947. So this the purpose of GATT is to help reduce worldwide tariffs. And WTO succeeded GATT as the World Forum for Trade Negotiations, right? So WTO is the successor to GATT. So the next organization that promotes international trade is the World Bank. Now, the World Bank is made up of 188 member organizations, and its purpose is to provide low-interest loans to developing nations for improving things such as transportation, education, health, telecommunication. The problem with World Bank is critics believe it finances projects that damage the ecosystem and supports countries that commit low-paying setups. So it's a criticism that's been levied against the World Bank. And furthermore, it has been heavily criticized for being very Eurocentric in its membership. So as a result, a new organization has come up, and I will talk about it in just a minute. Before I go to that new organization, let's look at the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund. The IMF is affiliated with the United Nations, and it is designed to assist in the smooth flow of money between countries. So the purpose of IMF is slightly different than the World Bank. The IMF is a last resort lender, makes short-term loans to countries suffering from unfavorable balance of payments, and it has become more high-profile in recent times because of its role in trying to shore up weaker European economies such as Greece, Portugal, and Ireland. So these organizations are traditional organizations that have been around for decades that are promoting international trade. A little while ago, I talked to you about a new organization that has come up because a lot of criticism against the World Bank is that it's very Eurocentric and America-centric. And so a new organization came up in 2014, and the name of this organization is the New Development Bank. And this information is really important. It may or may not be in your book because it's a fairly new organization. As I said, came up in 2014, and it's called the BRICS Bank. BRICS Bank named after the 5 BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's headquartered in Shanghai, China, and it was opened up as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF. These 5 nations together account for 42% of the world's population. And that this is the problem that's going on. World Bank and IMF are very, very Eurocentric. But what's going on in today's economy is these 5 BRICS nations account for 42% of the population of the world, which is a big chunk, and about 30% of the world's GDP. The 30% is based on the PPP data. Yet many of these nations did not have a prominent seat at the World Bank or the IMF. Thus, the NDB was started. It was started to counter the supremacy of the dollar and the Western institutions. And unlike the IMF and the World Bank, each nation in the NDB has equal say, regardless of their GDP size, However, in World Bank, voting is based on share per stock held by member nations. So, World Bank voting is based on how many shares a country has in the World Bank. Um, in New Development Bank, each country gets one share and only one share, which means they have equal voting right. No country is given more power than another country. And they've made it even more egalitarian. So the New Development Bank says membership can be expanded and will be expanded to other member nations in the emerging market once each nation sorts out its debt. How powerful is this bank? Just to give you a little idea of how powerful it is, the World Bank, as of 2016, has $215 billion and 189 member nations. The most powerful nations are China, France, Germany, the US. US has about 11 to 16% shares, and the other countries have about 4 to 7% shares. The World Bank has $215 billion with 189 countries, but the New Development Bank, that just opened in 2014, has $100 billion worth of equity shares and 5 nations that have equal votes. So it's really important information to understand if you're going into international management, to know the new developments, things that are happening around the world, and how they might change the way business has traditionally been done across borders. But here's the thing that's really important, right? It's not just trading blocks, not just the reason for globalization, but also the national culture. A very important piece is the national culture. Why do 10 to 20% of all US managers sent abroad? 20% is a fifth of the managers that are sent abroad for work return early because of adjustment difficulties, job dissatisfaction. Why? Why do these American managers fail abroad? Biggest answer, the one answer is national culture. Difference in national culture. A lot of people think that culture is food and festival and the clothes that they wear or the dances that they engage in. Those are just what we call surface level attributes of a culture. If you look at this iceberg, that's what culture is pretty much like. What you see is a very small fraction. What you see is fashion, food, holidays. So a small example that I will give you is when my mother first came to the US. She came to visit me in Georgia. And the only exposure to American culture she had had was watching the show Friends. So when she came to the US, she didn't really feel she was in the US till one day we were visiting New York and we were sitting in a cafe that had this big couch, and she looked around and she said, "Oh, now I feel I'm in the US." She thought that's what US is all about, but not really. It's just one example to show you that that's how a lot of us do that. We think that that's what the culture of that country is, based on what we've seen on TV, in movies, or from one friend we have. Now, really, culture is much, much more deeper than that. And the deep attributes that you see are the ones that actually determine how business is done in a country, what their communication styles are, how do they make expressions, facial expressions, their eye contact. What is their notion of personal space? How do they conceptualize leadership or beauty? Or what are their attitudes towards work or cooperation versus competition? How do they look at marriage and religion and decision making? How do they look at fairness and justice? All these things will determine success success in business between two cultures. Are you able to understand how the other culture that you're doing business with looks at justice and fairness? How do they look at time? So one of the best ways to look at the number of organizations that are doing research to understand the cultural differences. And one of the ones that we'll talk about is the globe, and I will talk about it in a second. One of the cultural dimensions that people often don't understand, it comes up more in language when you're doing communication, is high context versus low context. So what I want you guys to do now is at this point, watch the video. At the bottom of this video, in the comments box, box, I have a link to someone explaining low context versus high context. It's a very well done video. So go ahead, pause my video, and open up the other video. Watch what the difference between high context and low context cultures are, and then come back and continue watching this video. So just like the difference between high context and low context culture, there are a number of other cultural dimensions. 9 of those dimensions are being studied by the GLOBE project. Now, I have a link for the GLOBE project under this video, and there's a link right here as well. Go to this link after I've gone over this slide and play around with it. The way I have these snapshot pictures of US versus China, you can go and get snapshots of any of the countries that you're interested in. Before you go to that country, pull up their cultural dimensions, so it tells you a little bit more about that country. So let me show you how to read. What does this mean? So your book explains all these cultural dimensions. Let's just look at them. So let me zoom in. Right. So let's start with the US, right? So this particular portion looks at the cultural practices and values in the US. So if you look carefully, the purple boxes are the boxes of that particular value. How much is it actually practiced? And the blue box shows how much do people believe. So the boxes are showing you the range across the board, right? This is the range from pooled data of all the countries that GLOBE has studied. The GLOBE project was across a big number of countries. I haven't looked at exactly how many countries. Their 2020 project actually maps 80% of the countries of the world. And so they pooled data. So the blue box shows you the range, what's the lowest score of any country, what's the highest score of any country. And the bars show you the average, right? So the blue is what the value is, and the purple shows you how do they actually practice. You know, a country or a culture might believe in something very strongly, but may not practice it so much. Okay? So, for example, let's go down, look at gender egalitarianism. Gender egalitarianism looks at gender equality. How much are the two genders, male and female, given equal importance? The higher the score a country has, that means the more equality the two genders have. So if you look here, US's score on how much do they value. So remember, blue is value. The bar right here is the average score. So this is the average, and US believes in gender equality relatively high, right? It's almost a score of 5 because the triangle shows where the country scores. But now purple shows how much does the country really practice that same value. And if you look carefully, the US is relatively low on a score of 3, which is the average. So even though US really highly believes in gender equality, it really doesn't practice it at that same level. It practices it at about a little bit more than 3, maybe a 3.5. Now, how do you use this? Let me scroll down here to China, right? So let's compare it to China. So this is China, gender egalitarianism in China. In China belief system for gender egalitarianism is really, really below. This is the average, and they scored below average. How about 3.5? And they practice it even lower, and about lower than 3. So if you compare it with the US, do you see the difference now? The US has a very high belief in gender egalitarianism, and they practice it about the same average of other countries. China, on the other hand, practices it lower than the other countries and even has lower value in gender equality. What does this mean? How does it translate into workplace behavior? Well, knowing these things helps you understand that when you send a female CEO to China from the US, or you are sending a male leader or a manager from China to the US, you need to help them understand how the American workforce has a much more gender egalitarian workforce than Chinese do. Women have almost the same amount of power as men do in the US compared to in China. And those are important things in the workplace. Think about that, because you have a workplace in this day and age that both the genders are working in. And knowing this information will help you understand how to behave in the new country or the other country. So go ahead, go to, let me get out of this. Yep. So go ahead and go to this website, glowproject.com, and play around with it. Look at the different schools, look at the different countries and their profile. You've already read what these different cultural dimensions are. Now go ahead and see how do they play out in these different cultures and countries. That's about it. That's those are the things that I really wanted to highlight in this chapter. So please, I have a ton of resources that are at the bottom of this video. The links are there. Do not skip those links. That are very important. They'll help you go for your exercises and your exam. So go ahead, watch, and go over those resources. Go over this video, and if you have any questions after that, feel free to email me. Until the next broadcast, thank you and goodbye.